am the Southwest MySTEM Regional Director, which is Region 1 of the MySTEM Network, and I'm housed at Kalamazoo RESA. And then I also wear a couple of hats. I am also the co-lead of our math action area with the MySTEM Network statewide. I am part of the Early Math Task Force, and at Kalamazoo RESA, I am one of the co-facilitators of our ABAR leadership team, and ABAR stands for Anti-Bias, Anti-Racism. And so we've been doing that work since 2018 as a formal team. And I am excited to have my colleague Jill with me online. So go ahead, Jill, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, friends. I'm Jill Griffin. I'm an education consultant at the Michigan Department of Ed. Good to see you all here.
And Jill needed to be remote for this because she has an appointment in a little bit, and so we're thankful that technology can bring us all together in so many different ways. So we worked this out. So we'll see how we deal with this today, and we'll make sure that everybody can hear and connect. One thing that I was mentioning is today we are going to ask you to engage in typing in the slides that we have. So if you wouldn't mind using the QR code or the URL to pull up those slides on your device if you have one. We're hoping that at least one person at each table would have a computer because it will be easier to type, but you can be the scribe for the group. So if you wouldn't mind joining with another group, or if you have your own device, that's fine too. We're going to be talking a lot at tables, and so it's going to be helpful for you to be with partners with other groups. So as we move into that part of the time, you can feel free to move around as needed. Anything else you wanted to say, Jill, before we go into things? All right. So just recapping the purpose of this session, we're really wanting to make explicit connections between equity, the early math, early literacy, organizational practices. And so we're going to be building on the conversations you had yesterday as well as today around the values specifically, so that we can really concretize those and say, like, what does this really mean? These are great words, but what does this really look like? And I think Melissa helped us to unpack some of that this morning, so you can bring her stories as well as your own that you might have been thinking about as we engage. I'm going to just give you a moment to look at the outcomes that we have articulated for this session. And maybe think about which one is bubbling up for you as the most salient or important for you to be paying attention to today. And one of the things that we wanted to do as a first kind of engagement is to think about what is equity when we think about education. What is equity? Thanks, Rusty. And so we're going to ask you to participate in a Slido, and I'm going to set this down a second and move Jill over so you can get that QR code. So if you use your phone to go to use the QR code and go to Slido, a little window will come up and you can type your answer in for what is equity in education. And I'm not going to share the slide yet, so we can have some think time. And I also am going to put up, after this, I'll put the QR code again for the slides so that you can get into those in a moment. So right now we're using the QR code to ask or to answer the question, what is equity in education? Come on in, friends. Welcome, come on in. We are engaging in our first kind of turn and talk in a moment. We're looking at what is equity in education. So if you have a phone and you can pull out and scan the QR code and you can add your ideas into the queue of like a chat in there. Jill, is there anything you're seeing that you want to highlight?
What I'm noticing is that I keep seeing all students getting what they need. And then there's one in there that says getting representation and having joyful spaces. I'm not sure I understand what joyful spaces looks like or feels like. And how do you do that? How do you give each student what it takes to be a successful learner? I think that's the question.
All right. So I think we're starting to kind of peel back some layers of the onion around what equity in education is. We're piquing some curiosities around what does this look like in practice. So I'm going to go back to our slide deck. And we're going to play just a short clip. And as you're listening to this video, it's only about 1 minute and 20 seconds long. I'd like you to think about how might this video articulate something that you put in the chat on the Slido. So what connections are you making?
In the U.S., equality is an important principle. So why isn't treating everyone equally always the right thing to do? The problem with equal treatment is that it doesn't always lead to equal results. Every plant needs sun and water, but that doesn't mean we should give all plants the same amount of sun and the same amount of water. A cactus needs a lot of sun and very little water to thrive. A tulip needs a moderate amount of both to produce a healthy bloom. A fern needs lots of water and just a little sun to grow big and bright. If you are planting a garden, you probably wouldn't place a cactus, a tulip, and a fern together and expect them all to thrive. But our classrooms are filled with students who all have different needs. By focusing on equitable treatment, we can consider those individual needs and then provide resources and support to meet them. That way, all students can thrive in school and life.
So I invite you to turn and talk with some folks at your table. And if you haven't already met them, you could introduce yourself and say your name, where you're from, and then what connections were you making from what you put in the chat on Slido to what is on the video? And is there any connection extension kind of things that you saw there? All right, I'm going to ask us to pause our conversation there. And we're going to pull back the layers of the onion, so to speak, around what educational equity is as we begin our conversation in this session. So I'm going to put up a series of kind of definitions or quotes and have us think about how does this help us to explain what educational equity is a little bit deeper. And so I'm going to just pause and look at these two quotes. So we have equity is achieved when all students receive the resources they need so they graduate prepared for success after high school. And that comes from the Center for Public Education. And then educational equity means that each child receives what they need to develop their full academic and social potential. And that comes from the National Equity Project. So thinking about your original definition that you put in the chat, then that layer on with the video, what does this layer on maybe to how we were articulating things? So go ahead and turn and talk at your tables. Okay, I'm going to have us pause there. And I'm going to add another definition here. So this is a slogan from Minneapolis Public Schools, and their instructional coaches have the mantra that they are interrupting the predictability of subgroup achievement. How might this add on to our definition and our understanding of what educational equity is? So go ahead and turn and talk again. All right, and we'll pause, and we have one more set. So this one is a little bit longer. There's two parts to it. So it says the educational policies, practices, and programs necessary to A, eliminate educational barriers based on gender, race, ethnicity, national origin, color, disability, age, or other protected group status. And B, provide equal educational opportunities and ensure that historically underserved or underrepresented populations meet the same rigorous standards for academic performance expected of all children and youth. And this was developed by Barbara Bitters. And I do want to say, in every session I've done that I've used this before today, I could not say that I belonged to that protected class group. Does anybody know what has changed in Michigan in the last month? Yes, and so I'm part of the LGBTQ group, and so I'm excited to say that now I can't be fired because of that. Most people didn't know that was a thing. And that's only in our state. It's not necessarily every state. And so even though that sounds like really important language, we have to really think about what's the implication of that protected group status, depending on the state that we live in, or the county, or the school district. Who are we really meaning when we talk about those things? So go ahead and turn and talk and think about how does this maybe layer on in our definition of equity. Okay, I'm going to ask us to pause there and come back for whole group conversation. And I'd love to have 3 or 4 folks that are willing to share something that bubbled up at your table that you would be willing to share for the group. So can I have a couple of volunteers? So 1, 2, 3. All right. And I'll hand you the mic so we can make sure you get recorded. And you just have to hold it. You just hold it right here. Well, and part of it isn't just necessarily the voice; it's getting it on the recording.
All right. Oh, now I'm being recorded. Forget it. No. Our conversation centered around, like, we get this and we understand this, and started talking about systematic changes in education, because when you have one teacher and 25 kids, and I'm not trying to be like a downer, how do you give all these kids what they need 6 hours a day when there's one of you? So how might we look at this through systems changes as well as changes in our classroom as well? Because it's like, you know this, how do you put it into practice?
So it's a both and. We have classroom level things, we have school and district level things that need to be happening. I think I went in the wrong order, sorry. I'll come back to you, Sharon.
All right. One of the things we discussed at our table is when you're talking about educational equity, we don't get to cherry pick the types of equity that we would like to support versus not support. So sometimes with my staff or my district, I talk about this in context of like special education, to say, well, I'm comfortable having students with autism, but I'm not comfortable having students with ADHD. When you look at our marginalized population, it's no different. We don't get to cherry pick what is comfortable within the public school setting. It's equity's equity. All is all.
Thank you so much, and that reminded me of my first year as a teacher. The special education teacher that was co-teaching with me came into my room and she goes, I don't do math. I was like, that's a thing? Like, that's an option? I was like, I'm not going to say I don't do special ed. Like, what? And it took me 3 years for her to be comfortable enough to come into my classroom and actually co-teach with me, because I didn't know what I was doing to connect and make sure I was meeting all of my students who had special needs, you know. And so it was just a fascinating dance to figure out, as a young teacher, how do I talk to this veteran teacher who knows more than I do about meeting students, you know. So we all have to own it, and we all have to be in this together. So thank you for bringing that up. And Sharon.
Thank you. So mine is pretty kind of connected to that. As we kind of went through each one of these phases, we added layers to that. And even looking at this image, we talked about there are things that are visibly obvious by looking at this picture, but also considering the things that we can't see. There are things that come up that still need to be protected or still need to be considered that we can't see. And how are we addressing those issues as well, and from an equity standpoint?
Thank you so much. So as we think about each of these representations of equity, there's limitations to all of them. So the minute we have a nice DEI statement or a diversity and inclusion definition or an equity definition, there's something limited to it. And so that's one thing that I advocate for, is, to me, having this conversation of like the layers of the onion, it just helps us see there's so many different facets to who are we trying to communicate to and how do we do that. So there's not going to be any one right definition, but there's multiple layers and aspects to it, and how do we make sure that we be precise and we mean what we say and we say what we mean. And so this is just kind of an approach to have us think about who are the folks that we're talking to around equity, and how are we articulating that? Are we talking past each other, or do we talk to each other? Are we saying the same thing? Are we on the same page around things? And maybe we need to expand how we talk about these different ideas. And so this was just kind of giving us some moment to really think about what is equity and what are we trying to do with that. Jill, is there anything you wanted to add in here?
what a nice conversation, and highlighted a lot of systems level concerns and things that you see. And I think it was my friend Sharon that spoke last. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. And I think what she's highlighting is really important because there are practices and policies that are invisible that get enacted without us even knowing, right? So we have to be cognizant, as Diane just said, of what is being enacted, what are we speaking to, and who are we listening to? Because if you go back a couple slides, there's intersectionality in that. And when right there, it's not based only on our gender. Equity is not based solely on our race and ethnicity. It is not our national origin. It's an intersectionality of all of those things. And so we do have special education children who are white and rural. We have special education children who are black and brown and in urban type of settings, also type of settings, right? And so we have to look at all of these together. Thanks for lifting that, Sharon.
I think one of the things too that was interesting, I've used this picture in a couple of conversations that I've had with folks, and it wasn't until about the third or fourth conversation that somebody brought up in the top row, the student who's using a wheelchair doesn't even have a helmet. They didn't even plan for that student to use the bike. Everyone else has a helmet, where down below, everyone has a helmet. And I thought that was a really interesting detail that I hadn't seen before. And so it really made me think about, like, even in a picture like this, like there's things I don't see because of my own biases, the experience that I move through the world with, you know. And so each one of these things, there's different details that we might see the next time we read them or look at them or, you know, those kinds of things. So it just helps me to understand how much having these continuous conversations are so important for us to deepen our understanding and go deeper in our analysis and application to those systems and structures. I'm going to pause a second and go back to the slides at the beginning so that folks can take a moment and get the slides up. So I'm just going to move this a second. We are asking you to use your devices to type into the slides. So if there's at least one person at your table that has a computer, that's helpful. You can use the URL there or the QR code to get up those slides. And you should be able to have edit access. So in just a moment, we're going to ask you to reflect on some things and type your ideas right into the slides. You also will have access to these slides, so you can feel free to steal any of the templates. I've stolen them from my colleague Larry Wynn, so I have to give him a shout out. And in just a minute, you'll see how we have structured those. And they're very helpful in these kind of situations where you have quite a few people and you want to get brainstorming and ideas out. So you might already have something like that, but I've found them to be very helpful. So if you have the slides up at your table, if you can give me a thumbs up. All right, awesome. We'll wait one more second. So you might be wondering, okay, yeah, we know this stuff about equity. We've talked about these things. Why are we spending some time unpacking that? But one of the things that that Jill and I, as we were planning this together, we really wanted to dig into the values, because we think that the values are what we're operating out of. And so this is an example that actually my assistant principal, when I was teaching, brought to us as a back to school professional development. And we talked about Dilt's nested levels of learning and how our identity is at the bottom, then our values and beliefs, our capabilities, our behaviors. And the idea here is that really who we are and our values and beliefs shape everything that we do comes out of that. And so kind of like Sharon was pointing to and some other folks in our conversations, we all have experienced through our own lenses of the world, and that's who we are. What's our identities? How have we been shaped by the world? And then those things are influencing our values and our beliefs. So if we don't know what our own values and beliefs are, we don't know what we're operating our behaviors out of. And so that's what has been really powerful to me about this work collectively between literacy and early math, is looking at those values and really unpacking those and understanding and making those more transparent, because oftentimes they're the hidden things behind us. They're unspoken, and we have to play the game and figure them out. And so we're going to be taking some deeper looks at those. There's another view of this as well. It's a little bit harder to see, but we just put that there with the URL. So if you want to dig into this a bit more, but this connects to the morning keynote around the mission, identity, beliefs and values, getting to our skills and capabilities, behaviors, environment. And so looking at the interplay between each of those levels there, that mission, identity, beliefs, and values is what we really are operating out of. And have we come to agreement around those in our buildings, in our district? And have we done the work on our own identity and understanding that? So we're going to dig into each of the values, and we're going to kind of do this as a cyclical process for the remainder of our time. I will be transparent and say that I have to catch a train in Michigan City, and this is not a bad math problem, but it is kind of a math problem. So I do have to leave at 2:15 sharp to be able to get back to Kalamazoo and then get to Michigan City. So we are going to shorten a little bit of the rounds of going through this, but I know you've been digging into these, so you can kind of expedite your conversations. So on this first one, we're going to ask you to turn to page 2 in your practices and look at each of the 5 practices. We're digging into the first one. And then on the next slides, I'm going to escape from here a second so you can see this. So the way this is structured is that on the next 2 slides, you have a couple of prompts that you at your table are going to collectively record your ideas. So on this, for example, on slide 13, this is going to be group number 1. And you can see the one up in the corner for the group number. You can add your names if you would like. You can just put first names if you want. And then we're asking you, what did you notice about that practice? What did you wonder? And what are the implications of that value, of the value number 1? So you're answering those 3 questions first. And then the next slide so you're going to have a lime green and then a teal slide. So on the teal slide, we're going to dig a little bit deeper. So that first part is just kind of surface level. Now we're going deeper into what is a concrete strategy that connects to the value on the previous slide, and how have you seen this idea come to life in your school or district. And so you can kind of bullet some ideas there, so it can be more than one. And we want to just get to that concretizing. So there's really powerful language on those values, but we need to unearth, what does this mean? What does this actually look like? And we saw a great example of that this morning from the keynotes experience, and so now we're wanting you to dig into your own experience on that. So each group has 2 slides, so you'll see a lime green and a teal, and then the next group, it has a group 2, and so on. So we're just going to go with table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So then you'll have 2 slides that you're looking at. Any questions about the process that we're engaging in right now? Jill, anything you want to add? All right. So you're going to have, let's give 10 minutes. Does that work, Jill, for this first part? So 10 minutes to dig into those 5 questions. We may give a little longer on this one and then speed up the other ones just to move through it. So, and I'll be wandering around. You feel free to mix and mingle and talk to other tables. You can also, the beauty of the digital slides is you can go eavesdrop on other people's conversations by just scrolling through the slides and seeing what they wrote down. All right? All right, so I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to pause us in our conversations and have us come back together. And I'd like to have at least 3 tables be willing to share something out. So who would like to start us off with something that came out on your table? So go ahead. And I'll pass the mic too, sorry.
Would you like us to share from the green slide? Or the
Either one. So you can share from either slide.
Okay. We'll share from the green slide. We noticed from the first value that the emphasis that the work is ongoing, sustained, and over time. And it kind of eliminates the practice of closing your door and just doing things the same way year after year. So that's it.
Thank you. So breaking down those silos is so important. Who else has something that they would be willing to share? And I was an 8th grade math teacher, so I can wait here all day. Well, at least till 2:15, right? So.
We just said it has to be like a collective approach where everybody has to be able to collaborate, be on the same page, come up with the same focus and goal, I guess, and everyone's moving in the same direction. And no one feels like more work is on one person and less work is on some people.
So it's everyone's responsibility. We can't just say, I don't do math, right? Like, it's all of our collective responsibility. And last one, thank you.
One thing we talked about is the goal of improving teaching and learning, and that sometimes when we are looking at data, it's not always the focus of our time, and surprisingly. So just maintaining that focus on continuous improvement.
Thank you. So it's really easy to get distracted by other things that are pulling at our time, and how do we keep the focus on the teaching and the learning and make it about what the students need. We can get distracted by other things, and a lot of times what adults need and not what students need. So, and then Jill, you wanted to add in a question you had.
I just had a question. So forgive me if it is. Who is the we in this statement? Who is the we? When we say we value, what position is this coming from?
Does anybody have a response?
I feel like this set of values, I think, were developed by the early math group, right? And then also adopted by the early literacy. They represent all of us and all of GELN, right? So I feel like in that way, we is like the royal we, all of the we, everybody here, right?
So is that all of us? So is the royal we every person in Michigan? So all the educators, potentially. It's the folks who are engaging in this document at the minimum, maybe. So it's trying to recruit more we's as we read this, right? So it started with a smaller group, went to a bigger group, to a bigger group. So in some ways, it's ever growing, hopefully, so that we are all, pulling together. We're all in this together, and the more that we're expanding this document and the understanding that goes with this document, we're starting to say we, and we know who we mean by that.
Yeah, I think that's really important because we have legislators who are creating policies, and I need to know that they see them as we. We have families and caregivers who are also sending their children to school. Do they see themselves as the we? Right? We have to be able to see and name who the we is in this.
That's really interesting to me to think about that, because I think from an educator standpoint, I see this meaningful change takes time, and it's like, yes, it does. Like 3 years to see the fruits of our labor, 7 years to grow asparagus, and then it'll keep flourishing forever. But if it's your own child, that whole idea of it takes time, there's a different sense of urgency when you're thinking of your own dear one and little piece of your heart that's walking around.
All right. I'm going to ask us to pause there, and we're going to move into our analysis of value 2. So we're going to skip down a couple slides. So we're looking at slide 27, and we have another set of the green and teal slides again to type your notes. So just take a moment and read the value number 2 before we jump into our conversations. All right, and we are going to take 8 minutes at our tables to do this analysis. So thinking about maybe moving a little bit more quickly through the lime green slide into the teal for this one. Okay, I'm going to pause us in our conversations right there. And we want to dig a little bit into the more concrete ideas, so the concrete strategies. So I'm going to ask folks to think about sharing something from one of the teal slides on this one. So for value 2, what's something you could share from your teal slide, either of the prompts that could help us understand what does this value really mean? What does it look like? And I'm looking for at least 2 people who would be willing to share something out. All right, thank you.
We had some discussion about a concrete piece being common definitions and common understanding of the terminology within this value, because we feel that there's probably a lot of room for, even as you did at the beginning of this session with a word like equity, there are many other words within here about like what does it mean if we're resisting and dismantling, or even who are our historically marginalized individuals and communities within our schools or within our communities, that those kinds of conversations would be a good start to unpacking this.
Thank you. So we need to know what are our identities as like staff and the people in charge in the district, and then what are the identities and the populations that we're serving, and what we also had a conversation around like what is our community ready for. You know, some of these conversations when we say a particular word, it becomes very volatile, and so how do we, manage that we all have to make these decisions and figure that out. Anything else that somebody wants to share that bubbled up on a teal slide for you?
One of the things that we talked about is because of state law, because of federal law, like teachers can't be risk takers if they don't know that they're protected or not. So it's great as a leader to tell your teachers, take risks, do this, make this great choice. But at the end of the day, we work for a board, we work for the community. So if your stakeholders don't know what the policy is, like we shared things that, like the word shall versus must in your policy. If you don't have a direct policy for it, it's really, really, really scary. We joked, but not to be the district that ends up on the news for the week. So people aren't going to resist and dismantle if they don't know that they're protected legally, professionally, that your administrator has your back. It's very, very tricky. So part of it, I think, as leaders is being aware of what your policies are within your district, making sure your board members are aware of the policies because they may or may not know, and then having things go through the appropriate councils, or if something needs to be changed or have the language brought to attention. Like the governor has a new proclamation about racism, period. Like that's non-negotiable. Just put the language in from the state of Michigan, from the law. But if local municipalities and boards don't have that specific language, it's really, really, really hard to tell a teacher, be brave and take the risk, because nobody wants to end up, on the news. You don't. And that's unfortunately where we're at. So part of it, I think, is being an advocate and knowing what is specific within your district, where to look for it, what's specific in your contract, so you're protected and your students are protected.
Thank you. So, we feel that sense of reality that, there's some ramifications for this work. And how do we make sure that we're not going alone? Because it's really easy to pick one person off. It's a we. Like back to Jill's question, we need to know who is the we that has our back. I'm part of anti-racism team at KRESA, and the group that trained us was joking about, like, there's a whole network behind you, like that commercial of Verizon. Like, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? And there's like all these people behind. And she's like, when you go out and do stuff, there's all these people who are behind you. So I feel empowered even before Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act was approved. Like, I talked about my LGBTQ identity in a whole lot of trainings that I did, but I knew that the folks at KRESA had my back. Otherwise, who knows what could have happened, And if I was in a classroom, it'd be like a whole nother piece, but I'm at the ISD, so I'm a little bit insulated in terms of some of that. And so we all have to navigate those contexts and figure out how do we do that. And so that's another reason why our language is so important. Just like we're asking students to code switch in, from like maybe home language to classroom language to like sport field language, we have to code switch in all these different ways. So the conversation I'm going to have in this room might look different than a conversation in another room, based on where we're at and our understanding and those kinds of things. So that even necessitates more that we've done our homework, both for our own personal work, but also understanding like the language and the policies and the practices that are out there that we can call people in to doing, So I appreciate this conversation. Going into the next value. So take a moment and read value number 3. And we're going to take another 8 minutes to dig into this one and especially put your time and effort into those teal slides as you're moving through this. All right, we're going to pause there and come back to whole group. And I'd invite a couple of people to reflect on something that you again recorded on one of the teal slides. So what were some concrete strategies that came out for you? And maybe somebody who hasn't spoken yet in the room today, so we can get multiple voices in. Thank you.
In our district, we have, through our ESD, my supervisor created, and some of our literacy supporters created a Classroom Libraries Makeover PD/series. And teachers took inventory of their classroom libraries currently. Then we've partnered with our local librarian, and she created big, huge lists of textbooks or texts and new books for classroom teachers that they were able to choose. And this is the second year, but she had to go to district leaders and say, like, here are some of the topics in some of these books. We've gone through them and we've looked at them. We need to know if you can support them, if your teachers choose these books, if parents or families come and disagree with them. And all the leaders were like, no, these are the kids we serve and the families we serve, and so they need to be represented too, and we will support our teachers. So it's really cool.
Awesome, thank you. And just like we were saying earlier this morning, that these practices connect and the values connect, we can see so many connections, how this plays into this value, but also other values. So thank you for sharing that. Another example of something that came up. There were really good conversations happening, so.
This is just one little thing, but we were talking about how, like, not assuming that everyone within an identity group is the same. Like, that you just don't make that generalization in terms of designing lessons for students or PDs for adults or things like that, that you're responsive.
Thank you. I also want to lift up that I heard a couple of conversations talking about the applicant pool for all the openings that we have around the state, and how who's applying might not be matching up with the student population that we are serving. And that's, I'm sure, a universal thing. And there's some really interesting strategies that the state is doing that we might all be connected to. But one of the statistics that haunted me ever since I was working on writing a grant 2 years ago was in my region. I work for the MySTEM network. We have 8 counties in our region. So there are 64 school districts, 125,000 kids. I looked at the racial makeup, and there were 31% students of color, and the teachers were 5% teachers of color, and that was across all content areas, let alone STEM. And that statistic has really haunted me, that if kids can't see themselves in the authority in the classroom from kindergarten through 12th grade, how will they ever think that they can be in that field? And so that's been one of the things that I've really, once I got that data and I could say that statistic, it helped to create a sense of urgency of why do we need to be recruiting particular people, and how do we not just recruit but retain. And so part of it is making sure that we have a culture that is what I kind of call hospitable. That like if I'm a person of color coming into the institution and I don't feel like I belong there, I'm not going to stay there. So what is the work that the institution needs to be doing to make sure that everyone on staff really does feel like part of that institution and belong? And what are the supports that all different kinds of folks are going to need that are on staff? And how do we help build that climate and culture of belonging and inclusion for the staff and for students and for families? And so that's one of the things that I appreciate in the language in these values is we're talking about all different kinds of groups of folks. So not only our students, or not only our teachers, but all of the folks that are connected into our schools. All right, we're going to pause there and go to value number 4.
While you're lifting that up, Diane, I want to piggyback on what you just said and notice that it's also language, right? We have multilingual learners, we have multifaceted children in the spaces, and so how are they learning? And in what language do we support them and their families in? They may be the only translator in their family. And so they're doing a lot of lifting for their family as well as themselves. So lifting that up as an identity too.
Thank you. Yeah, there's multiple identities that we need to be paying attention to and thinking about how we serve. So looking at value number 4, go ahead and read that before we get into our group conversations. And I'm going to shorten our conversation on this one to 6 minutes, just because we're getting probably a little faster in our analysis. Okay. All right, I'm going to pause us there. And that was a little bit of a shorter conversation, but I think that we're getting deeper a little bit quicker on some of our conversations, so I appreciate you leaning into that. I'm curious what things were bubbling up for you that were concrete strategies connected to this value that you've seen. Thank you.
We talked about the take risks piece the most, and a concrete strategy is just being really intentional with your time with staff. And we have principals at our table, and just kind of talking about how you have to intentionally set that up to build trust within your building.
Thank you. And one more idea that came out.
Kind of similar to what you talked about. We talked about intentionally planning opportunities for students, parents, the teachers, the admin to share how they're feeling and concerns or issues. And then the important part is then acting on what you hear. That helps to build trust. Even if there's things that can't, there's some things that are out of our control, but this morning, them indicating that they looked at those survey results and then made really specific changes, like that meant a lot to all of us in there.
And as I was listening to tables talking about things, a couple of things that I connected to that some schools that I taught and did that I think are connected with this value. One time we saw that we were having low attendance with our traditional middle school conferences, because at the middle school level you have to go see all these different teachers and it can take hours, and who has time to do all that? And so we actually went out into the community and held conferences at a local church and had like a dinner that went with it. And we had the kids playing in the gym so that it was much more of like a family-friendly environment. And you can kind of quickly go to a group of teachers and hear and talk to them. And when people saw that we were willing to come out of the school and be in the community, that built huge trust. So we didn't have like exponential numbers, but the act of doing that then helped us build relationship over time. Another piece that we did was around adjusting conferences, but it was in having, I'm blanking on the name of it. We had like kind of a homeroom group where we had just 15 students instead of having 150 kids on my team as a math teacher. And then we did our conferences with just that focus group. And so I could sit down and we made student portfolios where the students had to communicate to their family what had they been learning and why did they get the grades that they did, and here's a portfolio of my work, and talked about that. So instead of me sitting down and giving all 150 kids a conference, I sat with 15 families, and the students presented what they were learning and doing. And so then we facilitated a conversation with the family, and they developed family goals. They went to the cafeteria after like meeting with me, and they made a goal sheet that as a family, here are our goals, and they turned those in so that then we could mentor the students in moving forward on those goals. And that, again, built relationships because we actually had time to talk, and we weren't just like cranking people through, and they were there for 3 hours or something like that. So some of these systems and structures erode those relationships. And so where are those points that we can leverage and build those trusting relationships that also then go with that learning environment? That changed the learning environment because students were accountable in a totally different way that didn't feel like punishment. It was like exciting to be able to show my family, this is what I learned, and they were excited to share that. And you might say, well, not every kid got to have their family come, but the students who didn't have a family member come in, they still chose an adult in the building that they had a relationship with, and they presented their portfolio to that adult. So everyone had to present their portfolio to somebody. And that was a really powerful experience over a couple of years. It just changed the culture in that school. So they don't have to always be like what we think will actually get to those relationships. There's other systems and structures that can help us with that. All right, I want to move us to our last value.
While you're doing that, I just want to add to what you just said.
Thank you.
My mom would not enter into the school because she was traumatized, and it was the same school I was attending. So there was a generational trust that we have to build up too, right? So just thinking about that, because that sometimes is a blind spot. I wouldn't have thought of that had she not voiced that concern.
Yeah, and that connects with like when we went out into the community, it just helped us build that bridge. So what are those kinds of things that we can do to build that bridge for folks who have not had the greatest experience with school in the past? All right, looking at practice number 5. So take a moment and read that that value. And we're just going to take 4 minutes for this conversation. Sorry, to move us along. All right, I'm going to pause us here. I apologize. I don't have to skate out of the room. But so I want to just have us come back and summarize and connect some of the ideas that we've talked about today. So thinking about this, bringing us back to our definition around equity, we just dug into these 5 values and looked at different aspects of equity. The things that you were brainstorming around strategies connect to that continuous improvement, that MyKIP process. And so part of what we wanted to have is that you can take this slide deck and take it back with you and have conversations. There's a whole bunch of different tables, ideas in there. So you can go back and look at and kind of steal ideas. That's what we do best, right? In education is take others' ideas, build from them. And so this is a lasting slide deck that you can go in and look at. But thinking back to that equity piece, and then also these nested levels of around learning. So thinking about how our identity and our values are that basis for where our behaviors are coming out of. And what is the identity and the value and beliefs work that we need to do so that we see a change in the behaviors that we as adults can control in our sphere of influence, and be able to meet all students' needs. So that's the main takeaway that we would like you to be thinking about is what is maybe the next step that you want to be committing to on your journey in this space. And so on these last couple of slides, we're just going to invite you to give Jill and I a little bit of feedback. So there's on the blue slides is what I got from today, and then on the teal slides, it says what I still need a little bit more of. So as we're thinking about other additional sessions to dig into, we would love your feedback on those. So that's just kind of our summary for today. I want to thank you all for digging in and having some deep conversations with somebody who you might not know at your table, so I appreciate that. And I just appreciate the spirit of collaboration and learning that has happened yesterday and today. It's just been a joy to be with everybody. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you. And Jill, anything you want to add in?
So I just want to say thank you. I'm in the car transitioning, so I appreciate your grace and patience with me. Y'all are amazing educators and have so many awesome ideas that you generate. So please collaborate. This is your network of folks. Thank you.
And I'll just leave this up for a moment. If you did not get the slides, not get the slides yet and you want to just take a picture of the URL, this will be available for you to look at later. So thank you so much, and you might have like a little bit of break before we go back to the big room. So thank you so much.